The Buffalo Bills had the opportunity to redo the defensive tackle room last offseason. How did it go? We're discussing that today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, folks, welcome in. We are talking defensive tackles today on the podcast, reflecting on the 2024 season and discussing what needs to happen here this offseason to improve this group. And we've talked about some position groups to this point where you felt like maybe the Bills kind of had what they need already on the roster. With defensive tackle, this is definitely a position group where you feel like there's some outside additions that need to happen this offseason. So we'll break it all down for you right now. Let's start by talking about the signature name for this group, and that's Ed Oliver, a 2019 first-round pick, number 9 overall. He's 27 years old, turns 28 in December, entering the second season of his 4-year, $68 million contract extension. And the Bills, in their efforts to create cap space this offseason, they can do a restructure or a conversion with Ed Oliver's deal, and that would free up $10.4 million in cap space. So I think that's something you can expect to see happen. 2024, Ed Oliver played in 14 games, 14 starts, was on the field for 66% of snaps, collected 29 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, and 39 pressures. His 2024 review is basically that he didn't come close to matching the impact or the production of what he did in 2023. Just look at these numbers. Tackles in 2023, 51, down to 29. Tackles for loss, 14, down to 5. Sacks, 9.5, down to 3. 9.5 down to 3. Run stuffs, 32 down to 15. I mean, just didn't come close. Now, he turned it on later in the year. I think that Detroit game forward was a good stretch for Ed Oliver. It reminded me of the player we watched in 2023, but there was a bunch of games before that where he was really quiet, and the Bills needed that impact, and he wasn't delivering it. And the Bills need him to be more consistently impactful. And you felt like in 2023 that contract extension that he signed at $17 million a season was looking like a bargain deal for the Bills. I don't think you have the same warm fuzzies about it today as you did during the season. Now, I'd say that $17 million a season, that's 16th in terms of the highest paid defensive tackle in the NFL. I think that's probably a pretty reasonable place for Ed Oliver to be. But again, it doesn't really feel like the same bargain as it did while you're watching him really have his best season in 2023. So as for the 2025 outlook, he's got to be consistently impactful. I want to continuously see 2023 Ed Oliver and late 2024 Ed Oliver all the time. And so you don't want to have to talk about like an established player like this, age 27 season coming up here, paid, right? Top 10 pick. You don't want to have consistency conversations. But that's where we're at because of the decline in production year over year from Ed Oliver. And so when I'm thinking of areas that this team can be better in 2025, it's Ed Oliver playing to the standard that he's showed us he is capable of. Daquan Jones, 2022 free agent signing, 33 years old. He turns 34 in December. Entering the second year of that 2-year, $16 million contract he signed last offseason. Perhaps you're interested in how the Bills can get out of that deal. there's not a great opportunity to do it unless it's a post-June 1st release where you would then save $5.5 million in cap for 2025. But you do accumulate $4 million in 2025 dead cap and $3.7 million in 2026 dead cap. You're probably best just keeping Daquan Jones. And I think at a minimum, Daquan Jones can be a reasonable rotational piece as your, as far as your nose tackle one technique position, just because there's really no cap saving opportunity here. And then you don't really want to just push out dead cap multiple years because you want to get like $1.5 million bucks. Doesn't make much sense to me. In 2024, Daquan Jones, 16 games, 16 starts, one of only 2 defensive starters that didn't miss a game due to injury, him and Greg Rousseau. Jones played 53% of the defensive snaps, 23 tackles, 7 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks, 24 pressures. As for his 2024 review, I thought he was just okay. I was certainly hoping for a lot more impact. And when you consider that 2023 the 2023 season into 2024, the whole idea was you had to do a roster reset. You had to get younger. You had to get cheaper. And the one exception that you made to that philosophy was extending Daquan Jones. And he was on a heater in 2023. Before that pec injury, had a strong campaign in 2022 and didn't really build on that. And maybe that's to be expected at age 33, coming off of a year where he missed a bunch of time due to a pectoral injury. But the Bills kind of went against the grain with their their off-season philosophies. And, maybe there's some buyer's remorse for extending Daquan Jones. And so in 2025, maybe there's a chance the Bills move on, but they don't have to. If he is back, which I kind of expect him to be, just be a stable player at one tech that probably helps groom the successor. And so you just didn't get enough from these starters. And obviously, I think the whole defense had its issues, whether it was adjusting to some new coaching, whether that's the coordinator or even some position groups. You had injuries early in the season with Milano, then Taron Johnson, then Terrell Bernard, injuries throughout the entire year. Just a lot of adjusting defensively. And you look at this defensive tackle group and just don't feel like you got what you needed out of them, which continues on in the next segment where we're going to talk about Austin Johnson and Dwayne Carter. We'll do that here on the other side of it, folks. Be sure to stick with me. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth-quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game more exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, never feel like I miss my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, folks, welcome back. Let's continue talking about this defensive tackle room. We'll discuss Austin Johnson now. 2024 free agent signing. He's 30, turns 31 in May, and his contract is expired. He signed a 1-year, $3.5 million deal, and that is expired. In 2024, played in 15 games, started 1, was on the field for 31% of the defensive snaps, collected 19 tackles, 0 tackles for loss, a half a sack, 8 pressures, and then he did have those 2 interceptions, which kind of crazy, right? Just randomly, the dude has 2 interceptions, never intercepted a pass previously in his NFL career, never in college, never in high school. All of a sudden, he gets 2. So that was kind of a fun layer to Austin Johnson's year in Buffalo. But overall, I was hoping for more, and I thought he could be a very good rotational nose tackle. and perhaps the best one the Bills have had, whether that's been behind Daquan Jones or Starlo Talele. I thought the Bills did a good thing by signing Austin Johnson on a modest deal. But as it turns out, he was just a guy. It's very much just a guy out there, not overly impactful as a run defender or a pass rusher, and just really looked ordinary to me. And I was hoping for more, which is pretty much what I'm going to say about every single defensive tackle. And so as for his 2025 outlook, I think he's probably one and done with the Bills. I don't expect the Bills to be overly eager to bring him back. I don't think they should. If you remember down the stretch, after Ed Oliver and Daquan Jones, all these guys took turns being inactive for a week, and the Bills were kind of like trying to figure out what their best group was to be active on game days during the postseason. And between Austin Johnson and Dwayne Carter and Jordan Phillips and Quentin Jefferson, they all took turns one at a time being inactive. And as the player that's the veteran, that had a full off season with the team, that had been a rotational player all season long, for him to be in that same mix, not a good spot to be. Now, he wound up being an active player, and the one that sat was Dwayne Carter, which I think was the right choice. But the fact that it had to be a conversation, I think, speaks to the lack of impact that Austin Johnson had in his 31% of snap rotational role. Which gets us to Dwayne Carter, a 2024 third-round pick, number 95 overall. He's 24, turns 25 in December, entering the second year of his rookie contract, a 4-year, $5.6 million rookie deal. In 2024, he played in 11 games. He started 3 of them. On the field for 42% of snaps in those 11 games. Collected 14 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 8 pressures, and didn't have a sack. As far as his 2024 review, I thought Dwayne Carter struggled a lot. The run defense was very poor, really struggled to anchor and be firm at the point of attack and hold his ground. And to me, that was expected. If you watched him at Duke, didn't see a very good run defender, a guy that got pushed around quite a bit. But the redeeming quality was that his pass rush looked pretty strong at Duke. And he flashed that ability to rush and penetrate and shoot gaps. And you thought, all right, maybe there's a decent sub-package rotational player here. But that didn't show up at all. I didn't see a strong penetration style player or pass rusher, especially pass rusher, where his pass rush win rate in 2024 was 2%. That's bad, yo. The next lowest on the team was Casey Toohill at 3.7%. Dwayne Carter was 2%. Every other player on the Bills was at 5.5% or better. If Daquan Jones is a measuring stick, Dwayne Carter was at 2%. Daquan Jones was 10.7%. Here's another way to contextualize that. 108 defensive tackles in the NFL in 2024 had at least 160 pass rush snaps. And I used 160 because Dwayne Carter had 163 pass rush snaps. Carter ranked 102nd out of 108 in pass rush win rate. Look, I mean, careers are not defined by a rookie season, but nothing excited me about Dwayne Carter this year. He had that one big tackle for loss. I mean, that was his big moment. If you watch the snap-by-snap consistency, he really struggled. And it gets to this bigger conversation about those first 3 draft picks last year. Keon Coleman, Cole Bishop, Dwayne Carter. Those are your first, second, well, not your first. I guess you had 2 second-round picks and a third-round pick. But those are your first 3 picks. You traded back, right? The Keon Coleman deal, you traded back, and the benefit was that you got this third-round pick, and it's Dwayne Carter. And Bean's got to be right about him. I keep saying that. And this wasn't the year that you would have liked to look at and say, oh, yeah, the Bills got a little something there, you know? Might be a nice little rotational piece of this defensive line. And so this draft class is very much under scrutiny. And look, we've been down this road before. I think about that 2022 draft class that had James Cook and Khalil Shakir and Christian Benford and Terrell Bernard. And coming out of that year, you didn't really feel that good about it, right? It was like, oh man, Kyer Elam couldn't really play. Maybe Benford's going to be a thing. Terrell Bernard, what's the plan to get him on the field? Is James Cook going to be a starter? Is Khalil Shakir really going to become a meaningful piece of the offense? Well, all of that worked out, but that's got to happen here because there's not a whole lot to show or not a whole lot of optimism right now for this 2024 draft class. I'm most excited about Tylen Grable as a 6th-round pick that could potentially be a good rotational defense or maybe developing starter offensive lineman, right? There's got to be some production here to come. And look, Keon Coleman, a young player, obviously Cole Bishop got some run. Dwayne Carter, these guys got to be answers. Keon Coleman's got to be a good weapon for this offense. Cole Bishop's got to be a good starting safety. Dwayne Carter at least needs to be a good rotational defensive lineman. And the jury is very much out on all of that. And I'm not sure I feel great about any of that at this point in time. Again, the book's not written. We'll give it a chance to play out. But I wish I felt better about those picks at this point in time. All right, let's keep talking about these players that were on the roster. Let's get to Jordan Phillips here. 2024 in-season signing. It's like his 3rd stint in Buffalo. 32 years old. He turns 33 in September. His contract is up. In 2024, 7 games, didn't start any of them. 24% of snaps in those 7 games. 5 tackles, no tackles for loss. 4 pressures, no sacks. As far as his 2024 review, I've never been Jordan Phillips' biggest fan, but I thought he did a really good job in those 7 games and had some splashy moments and had some competitive run reps. I was pretty satisfied with him, all things considered, as a late season signing that didn't stick with the Giants, didn't stick with the Cowboys. I thought he did a nice job coming to Buffalo. And I'll be honest with you, I think it's unfortunate that the play that he made in the AFC Championship game is just going to be forgotten. I mean, it was a 29-29 game late in the 4th quarter. Kansas City has the ball. It's 1st and goal from the 10. And Jordan Phillips blew up the play for a sack, a 7-yard loss. Gets it to 2nd and 17. They don't gain another yard. They wind up settling for a field goal, give the ball back to Buffalo with a chance to go win the game. That play should have been like a legacy play in the history of the Buffalo Bills. But because the offense couldn't get it done, Dalton Kincaid couldn't catch that ball, whatever you want to point to, it's a forgotten play. But that was an unbelievable moment. That's going to be overlooked. And so as far as the 2025 outlook here goes, I mean, he said he's not playing anywhere else. He's come out and said that. I can take it or leave it with Jordan Phillips. I want to see this defensive tackle group and this defensive line turn into a stable of dudes. And I don't know that Phillips gets you closer to being that. But if he's your 5th defensive tackle, I think you can do worse. Maybe a practice squad guy. He's not going to go anywhere else. And so I guess if he's going to be on a team, it's going to be in Buffalo. I guess in what capacity, we'll see. But I don't think Jordan Phillips should preclude you in any way of making other investments at this position group because they got to get better. And so we'll see as it relates to Jordan Phillips. Obviously, it's Buffalo or bust for him. Let's get to Quentin Jefferson, a 2024 in-season signing. 31 years old. He turns 32 in March. His contract is expired. 7 games, 0 starts, 26% of the snaps, collected 8 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 1 sack, and 7 pressures. He didn't get much opportunity. I felt like his biggest chances came in some of those games late in the season where Dwayne Smoot wasn't available. And by they, I mean the Bills, they like this role, this inside-outside player. Dwayne Smoot did it last year. Shaq Lawson's done it in years past where it's a defensive end that's a good run defender, but can also reduce inside and rush interior gaps. And Quentin Jefferson filled that role for a couple of games with Dwayne Smoot out. And then, of course, he was active for the postseason run. I think he's a decent sub-package rusher. I don't think much of his run defense, but as a sub-package interior pass rusher, I think you can do worse than Quentin Jefferson. In 2025, I think he's probably unlikely to return. This guy's bounced around a ton. Going back to 2019, he played in Seattle, 2020 in Buffalo, 21 with the Raiders, 22 back to Seattle, 23 with the Jets, 24 with the Browns, gets cut in the middle of the year and comes back to Buffalo. This guy's bouncing around like crazy. Again, decent sub-package rusher, going to turn 32 in March. I don't think there's much of a urgency from me to bring him back. All right, I want to tie a ribbon on this conversation on the other side of it and really discuss the dynamics of this offseason for this group, what the Bills need to do, and talk about some of the disappointment that was in 2024 overall. So, folks, be sure to stick with me. All right, so this group didn't come close to meeting expectations overall. I think I can look at every single player and honestly say that I feel like I wanted more from them. And I think what's most disappointing about that is if you remember the conversations that we had at this time last year about the defensive tackle room, it was the fact that it was Ed Oliver. Like, that was it. Ed Oliver was the only player under contract. And then you had an opportunity to redo the rest of the room. And the Bills made investments here. They invested an $8 million APY contract to Daquan Jones at 33 years old. They invested a third-round pick in a defensive tackle in Dwayne Carter. They gave Austin Johnson a modest 1-year, $3.5 million deal. And the Bills have kind of been satisfied mostly with that four-man rotation. And you're like, okay, Ed Oliver was a dude in 2023. Daquan Jones, flashy, stable, like we think he'll be a good one tech. You know, we want to get younger and cheaper, but this would be the exception. All right, let's get a athletic rookie with a top 3-round pick and a veteran in Austin Johnson. That's going to be a good defensive tackle, rotation. And it wasn't. That's what's disappointing, especially when you think about, all right, I have to bring it up. Poona Ford and Tim Settle. Those guys didn't do anything in Buffalo. Poona Ford, undeniably good season with the Chargers. Tim Settle, best season of his career this year with Houston. Now, I think Houston's overall defense and what they have on the edge, and they have a very good secondary. It's a good overall group. I think it's a good spot for him to be able to play his best ball. But, I mean, he did more in one season with Houston than he did in 2 years in Buffalo. And so it's not a good feeling to have all these opportunities to rebuild the room, to say goodbye to players, and then be better somewhere else. And then the guys that you bring back aren't as good as they were or didn't quite meet the expectations. Not a good story to tell here, folks. It's just not. And I know, obviously, like, this is even further elevated in concern level because you just watched the Eagles and this defensive tackle group that they have, and Milton Williams and Jalen Carter, and of course their edge rushers, all these guys come in and do the thing that you want to see the Bills do to the Chiefs in the postseason. So yeah, it's all very disappointing. All those layers combined, it doesn't tell a good story. So after you do all that, by the end of the year, you're hunting down Jordan Phillips and Quentin Jefferson to come in and help provide some impact. Miscalculations, I think, is probably the way to sum it up. So what do the Bills have? They have Ed Oliver, Dwayne Carter, and Daquan Jones under contract for next year. 3 expiring contracts: Austin Johnson, Jordan Phillips, Quentin Jefferson. They're all north of 30. I don't have much urgency to bring any of them back. Maybe Phillips as the 5th guy that potentially has to be a practice squad player. I don't have any urgency on the rest of these players. So what do they need to get done here? Quite a bit. Number one is you need to get a replacement / succession for Daquan Jones. Got to have a good plan in place here, whether Jones is back or not. If he's not back, then you need a starter. If he is back, then let's get something in the building that can be groomed to have a platoon timeshare this year, but then feel good about him being the guy next year. If not, that happens even this season. And it's a good draft. It's a very good draft for defensive tackles. Very good. And when you think about nose tackles, Kenneth Grant from Michigan is definitely like the name. I don't know if he gets to 30. Derek Harmon from Oregon I like a lot. Alfred Collins from Texas is a really good option. And I haven't even watched all the players yet. I'm probably like 50 evaluations deep at this point in the overall class. And maybe like 8 of those have been defensive tackles. So I got a lot of work to do still on this draft class. But the guys I've seen I like, and the conversations about this draft class suggest that the defensive line talent is just really, really strong. So you got to get your replacement succession plan for Daquan Jones. You got to find some meaningful depth. The Bills are going to rotate their defensive line. Ed Oliver is going to be 65-70% of snaps. Daquan Jones is probably around 45-50%. And then, I don't think Dwayne Carter's earned me saying that he should play 30% of snaps or anything like that, but he'll probably be relied on to do that. You got to figure out this depth. You got to find more impactful players that can step on the field and help your defense. Dwayne Carter's got to figure it out and take a step, like at least be a player that we feel good about in a 25 to 35% of snaps role. Ideally more than that, but I want to keep expectations reasonable. I didn't love Carter coming out of Duke, and the Bills drafted him pretty high, and the Bills need to be right about that. And then, of course, you need consistency from Ed Oliver. That's as important as anything I just talked about. Like, that guy's got to be the guy the Bills are paying him to be. So, not a great story to tell here, folks. I wish this was a podcast that had better vibes, but we got to be honest about what's on this team and how investments were made and what it did, right? That's what we do. We evaluate on this podcast, and this is not like the offensive line conversation that we had yesterday. So I do hope you enjoyed nonetheless. We'll get through the rest of these position groups in the coming days. Herd mentality coming up. Obviously, the combine is next week. The draft will be here before we know it. Free agency, all kinds of stuff. The NFL never sleeps. Neither does this podcast. We're here for you daily, all year long. So don't miss anything. Make sure that you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. And I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.